it okay for Christians to read other religious holy books?
Where America is in Bible prophecy.
Women becoming pastors and
Anointing homes and praying over homes.
Why would God have people tormented and burned for eternity?
What happened or where Jesus went after he died?
What is your opinion? What does the Bible say?
This is Pastor's Perspective. We're here every Monday through Friday providing answers on a variety of topics, including the Bible, end times, other religions, and the family. And now here's today's host, Brian Perez.
So blessed to be with you today on the Pastor's Perspective program. Thankful to have you listening. And with me today in the studio, Brian Brodersen, the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California. And on the Bobby Cam, we've got author and apologist Dr. Bobby Conway from the 1 Minute Apologist channel on YouTube, who shortly after this program is done will jump onto an airplane and fly over here and be with us for the next few days in the studio. Right, Bobby?
Yeah, that's right. I'm excited to be with you guys, and I love my trips out to California for sure, so it'll be great.
We won't tell Tony Clark, though, because although he's coming out to California in a few weeks, too, so that'll be good.
That's right. And, I'll miss you on Tuesday, but I'll be with you on Thursday.
Thursday, yes. Yeah. Very good. All
Wonderful.
Right. Yeah. So lots of good calls on the board that we're going to get to. And we'll start with, there's a couple that look like they're related. So we'll start with this one first. Marissa, listening on Freedom Radio FM in Arkansas. Thank you for holding for a super long time. How can we help you?
Yes, you're welcome. How are y'all guys doing?
Doing well, thanks.
Good, thank you.
Good. My question is, what would Jesus do as it pertains to, like, violence? Is violence ever the answer?
What do you mean by violence?
Just as in fighting or, like, to settle an agreement? Or is there ever a time where violence is needed or where it would be okay or if it's justifiable? Or
Well, I think, violence is a really broad term. And I think, more specifically, you have to,
fighting?
There's law enforcement, you're faced with a violent criminal, you have to respond with equal force or greater force to subdue them. Some people call that violence. I don't think that would qualify as violence. I think the criminal accosting somebody, that would be violent. So are you thinking of it in terms of law enforcement, military, or are you thinking of it just in the everyday experiences of life where you have a disagreement with somebody and should you ever revert to violence to try to get your point across?
Yeah, give us an example or something, Marissa.
Yes, that would be the last thing you said, to get a point across. Okay, so my boyfriend has been in a couple of situations lately where he decided that he needed to fight someone, and my stepdad and my mom have kind of not let my little brother and sister come to our house anymore because he decided to do that, but he felt like he was doing the right thing, I guess, in the situation. So, and I was just wondering, I don't know how, it's hard for me. It hurt my feelings, and it hurts his feelings, I guess. And I just, I don't know. I just want to see what y'all thought about that.
Well, it sounds like your parents are concerned about your, if there's a violent tendency here, that they're concerned.
Yes. That's exactly what they said.
Yeah, and that's understandable, right? I mean, you don't want anybody to get hurt. And now, self-defense is legitimate. There are times you need to defend yourself, but I think to just go out and be the aggressor, to just go out and say, I got to get violent with this person, that would be contrary to what the Bible teaches us by example, in the example of Jesus, obviously, and even the apostles, and it would be contrary to what the Scriptures teach in the sense of giving us instruction. Now, this is kind of a different question. I want to ask you something, Marissa, because you mentioned, so you and your boyfriend You said your boyfriend, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So it sounds like, are you guys living together?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So are you Christians?
Yes.
Okay. Now, do you realize that that's a problem according to Scripture to be living together?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes, I do.
Okay. Are you guys working on that? Are you trying to? Now,
yes.
Does your boyfriend claim to be a Christian as well?
Yeah, he is. He is. We both are.
Yeah.
We're just going through our walk, But I just didn't know, like, if it was, I guess, like you said, self-defense would be okay. And I just wanted to know where that stood as far as, I guess, if you pray to God about, what's right and wrong and you feel okay in the midst of whatever happens, then that's just, but we just didn't agree on some things when it concerned that. So
has he ever been violent with you?
No, he hasn't. And you wouldn't think that, I don't know, I guess the times that he has been, since I've been with him, you wouldn't really see that in him besides when it actually came to the moment of it happening. And he's a really good guy. I just wanted to see what y'all thought about that and what I could tell my parents. And because I guess really I just want my brother and sister to be able to come over to my house still.
Sure. Yeah. Well,
I understand whatever you point to.
Okay. All right.
Bobby, did you want to add anything to this conversation?
No, that's good. I appreciate all the thoughts that are coming together.
Yeah. Marissa, what do you think?
Okay. Thank y'all so much.
Okay. We're glad you're listening. Keep listening.
Absolutely.
Call us again.
Please do. And this is Pastor's Perspective. Brian Perez here with Brian Brodersen and Bobby Conway. And I was wrong. The two questions are not about the same thing, but we'll go to Brittany anyway. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective, Brittany.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. So I have a question. I'm still trying to understand, how the Palestinians came into, the land, the promised land. And I have a friend who's Palestinian, and she's having a hard time with the conflict. And I was just wondering, how can I be compassionate towards her situation, even though I feel like that land was meant for the Jews.
Now, when you say your friend is having a hard time with the conflict, in what ways?
Well, because she's Palestinian, so she feels like that land should be theirs, and how, Israel is attacking them and they're innocent, and I don't know, just stuff like that.
Is she religious? Is she a Muslim or is she a Christian?
She's actually Catholic, and I was also wondering about that too. Is that is that a contradiction to be a Catholic Palestinian? Because
No.
They believe that.
No, Palestinians are primarily, they're Arabic. They've been given sort of this label of being Palestinian because they have some history in the country. In some ways, it's almost a bit of a political label. But there are Palestinians who are Christians, Palestinians who are Muslims, Palestinians who would be Catholic, like you said that she is. This is a really difficult thing, and I don't think there's anything that you could say to her in regard to the situation where she's going to accept the idea that that land God has given to the Jewish people. I mean, that is just not. Palestinian people cannot get their head around that because of the history. So, when the Jews came back into the land after the Holocaust and all of that, and there was the battle in 1948, and the Arabic countries surrounding the nation were pretty confident that it would just be a matter of time before they wiped out this new effort to create a Jewish state. They gave word to the people living in the country to exit the country temporarily, and then when they settled the issue, with the Jews, then everybody would move back home. Well, the battle went the opposite direction of what they thought. So of course, the Arabic forces lost the battle, and the Jews became an independent state, and so people were driven out of their homes and off of their property, and that didn't just happen in 1948. It happened afterwards, all throughout the history. There's been those kinds of things that have occurred, there's some injustices involved in that for sure. It's a really, really complicated situation. God has promised the land to Israel. He gave it to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but also they will not inherit it until they embrace their Messiah. So this is the catch-22. The Jews are attempting to live in a peaceful situation that literally can never happen as long as they reject their God. Now, of course, many of them don't think they're rejecting their God. They think they're faithful to their God because they follow Judaism and so forth. But according to the New Testament scriptures, Jesus said it himself to the leaders of the nation. He said, unless you believe that I am he, you will die in your sins. So there is no relationship with God for anybody, including a Jewish person, without Christ, or in Jewish terms, without the Messiah. So this is the predicament that Israel is in presently, and will remain in this predicament until the Lord comes back. They never really will have any kind of a lasting peace. I wish they did. I love Israel. I love the land. I have Palestinian friends. I have Israeli friends. I think it's a wonderful place. I want to go there, and I want to enjoy the history, and I want to have that experience. I don't want people getting killed, bombed, blown up, any of that stuff. But unfortunately, that's the world we live in.
Yeah.
So,
Brittany, does that help you?
Yeah, just one last thing, Brittany. I would just say, just try to be as compassionate as you can with your friend and as understanding. And, Jesus is really the answer. She needs to know Jesus, and that will take her, that'll be the first big step toward, she might never really come to the conclusion that the Jewish people are supposed to have the land. I know Palestinian Christians that still haven't concluded that. But getting right with Jesus is really the answer. Mm-hmm. That's where the peace is going to come for her personally. Yeah. So does that help at all, Brittany?
Brittany, does that help you? Are you there, Brittany? Did you put us on mute?
Yes. Sorry, I put you on mute.
I knew it.
I'm at an appointment, so I can't really talk, but I appreciate you answering my question.
Okay, was that helpful?
It was. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Thank you for calling. And you said something interesting, Brian, that there's a lot of Palestinian Christians who still haven't quite wrapped their head around.
Yeah.
But
it's a difficult thing. I mean, it's, because, when you're living in this environment where you feel like you are being unjustly treated, and then you're looking at these people that are doing that, and you're trying to get your head around, well, but these are the people of God, and you've got, Western Christians, especially American Christians, say, some American Christians kind of just, give Israel a complete pass on everything. Mm-hmm. They're not doing anything wrong. They're God's people. It's God's land. He gave it to them. These other people need to just get over it. It's way more complicated than that. Mm-hmm. Way more complicated than that. So, yeah, I mean, we had a couple of years back, maybe you remember this, we had 3 Palestinian Christians and 3 Jewish believers come, and we did like a full conference with those guys.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, there was even some tension, on the platform.
Wow.
In moments because of just these conflicting views.
Is that archived anywhere? We got to find that. That would be interesting to.
Well, I think it was Joel Rosenberg. Joel sponsored it. It was one of his things. So Bobby, you're being really silent. I don't want to hog everything here. Anytime you want to jump in on this conversation, but it really is a complicated thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I went on a trip a year ago to Israel, like the October. Before COVID hit, with a bunch of apologists in the country that have a national platform. And basically we were flown out by a group in Israel, and the whole purpose of the trip was to help us as a Christian apologist to better understand the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it is a difficult thing to understand. And I think that depending upon the news sources that we watch, we can have a certain perspective. Then you go to the land and you meet Palestinians. I remember saying this statement on my first trip to Israel many years ago to a Palestinian, and I didn't realize he was a Palestinian. And boy, he opened up a conversation, just the sweetest person, began to share his perspective on that. And I just realized in talking to a real human being versus watching the news, you know, when you sit down and you listen to people and you realize, you know, at the end of the day, they're all God's people. And unfortunately, they fight over this land stuff all the time. But the situation is incredibly complex. And I think sometimes we just don't realize how little we know about it. Like sometimes the loudest people know the least. You're right, because they've just been indoctrinated in through their one lane. But at the end of the day, we're not going to have ultimate peace in the land until Jesus is reigning. And that's just an unfortunate fact.
All right. Good conversation. Brittany, thanks for calling us today on the Pastor's Perspective program.
I'm going to recommend a film that actually just came out. And so a friend produced this film. He wrote me months and months ago, said, hey, would you give an endorsement to the film? And it's called Hope, Hope for the Holy Land. And it is really a good film. And he did, I've seen a lot of films, you know, on Israel and you know, he addresses the Palestinian-Israeli thing. I really felt like he struck a really great balance. He interviewed plenty of people on both sides, believers, unbelievers, you know, Jews, Arabs, Muslims. And it was a really helpful perspective on what is actually happening in the land. And I think right this moment, for anybody that really wants to, that's the conference right there. Yeah, anyone who wants to take the time, and I think it's, you know, maybe an hour long or a little bit more, but it's worth watching. It's really an excellent film.
Is this the one here? I think I found it online. Hope in the Holy Land?
Yes, available now. Hope in the Holy Land, delving beneath the surface of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Yep. All
right.
Very good.
Okay. HopeInTheHolyLand.com is where you can find out more about that. And then those conferences that we were talking about that Joel Rosenberg put together, if you go to epicenterconference.com, scroll through, you'll be able to find there's a panel discussion with Jewish ministry leaders. This happened in 2017 at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. And then there's the one with the Arabian ministry leaders. You can find each of those videos there at epicenterconference.com. Just look for 2017 at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. And the movie, again, that Pastor Brian just mentioned, Hope in the Holy Land, HopeInTheHolyLand.com for more details. All right, earlier we talked about 1948, and here's a question about that year. James in California, welcome to the program.
Hello.
Hi, what's your question?
Yeah, my question was that I talked to the pastor friend of mine about the coming back of Israel to the promised land, or where they are right now since 1948. And so he was telling me this morning that it's not. I was wanting to know the difference. Is it a Bible prophecy for them to be back, or that they have? He was claiming that they are brought back by the UN or Britain. So it's not a Bible prophecy, as I have thought. It's God who has brought back in the land.
So God didn't do it, the United Nations did it. That's what your pastor thinks?
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah. Bobby, I feel like I'm hogging everything here. Do you want to jump in on that?
Well, I wait for Brian to ask me before I jump in. So that's on. He needs to rope me in a little bit here.
Sorry.
Yes. So he's the moderator, and I don't want to usurp his role. So, and whenever you want to answer, you are Brian. The
venerable.
The venerable. So
Did you forget already? Come on, you gave me the title.
No. Well, we're getting into a lot of, today seems to be the prophecy show. And so you guys know yes, I mean, if you are, in Ezekiel, in the book of Ezekiel, it is prophesied that God would lead his people back someday into the land. And so I think that if you were to kind of go into the sections, like chapters 33 to 35, 36, 37, 8, 9, that whole area is incredibly informative on end times and God's future prophecies as it relates to things like the future battle of Gog and Magog, as it relates to God bringing his people back to the land. So I think that the 1948 deal that took place was incredible as another signpost that we are in the end times, that things are coming together. I mean, they never thought, it's just, you never would have thought that they would, after all those years, after almost 2,000 years of wandering, that they would be brought back to their land. So that's a very beautiful thing. But as Brian just talked about a little bit ago, it's bigger than being in the land. You need to have Christ reigning in your heart.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for your question today, James.
No, I would... I just wanted to get Bobby to chime in, but I would say too, I think the way we need to understand this is that I think that there are certain things that are absolutely prophetically necessary for the end time scenario to transpire, and one of them is Israel to be in the land. So the prophecies that speak of Israel being in the land, I think. I don't see them as like the prophecies are totally being fulfilled presently, but I see that this is a preliminary, like a providential move of God. So, providence is different than prophecy, right? Prophecy is going to be very specific, where providence is more general. So I think that if there's any portion of Scripture that has been fulfilled prophetically regarding Israel, I think it would be Ezekiel 38. That the valley of dry bones, can these bones be made to live? Ezekiel says to the Lord, Lord, you know. And, suddenly the muscle, the bones come together, the muscle, sinew, all of that comes together.
Sinews.
Yeah, and then here's this person that's fully together, standing on his feet, and the Lord says, "This is the house of Israel." So He answers what it is that Ezekiel's seen, and they've been scattered, they've been like dry bones, but God's going to bring them back. But there's an interesting little thing, and this is verses 1 through 9, and then right in the 9th verse it says, "But there was no spirit in them." So I would say if there's a prophecy that's been fulfilled, it's the first 9 verses of Ezekiel 38.
Yep.
And now the rest is yet to come. There's no spirit in them, because if you look at those passages, they are centered around the final battle, which I think Battle of Gog and Magog, I think, is what we commonly call the Battle of Armageddon, and the second coming of Jesus and the establishing of the kingdom. Yep. And then chapter 40 is a description of the millennial reign of Christ. So you go right into it. So I would say that Israel is in the land providentially. God has put them there, but not in the total sense of what the prophecies say, because the prophecies are more specific, that they're in the land with a direct connection to God, which they do not have presently.
I like the way that you described that because it's exercising a little bit of caution. I mean, frankly, if I'm just being honest, like from the beginning of the book of Ezekiel with the wheels, it gets a little wheels off for me. I mean, this is a tough book. This is a tough book.
It's tough.
And it's really tough. I mean, then you're getting into the whole temple when you're looking into chapters 40 up to 48, and you're just trying to figure out, okay, these animal sacrifices, what's going on here?
Right.
And then okay, how does this play together with Daniel chapter 9 versus, in Daniel's 70th week? And then then you're looking at, the Olivet Discourse, and you're trying to put all this stuff together. And that's where sometimes I feel like the more I look at it, the more I scratch my head, and I have to step back and go, what are these big pieces? I've never heard it put quite like that, though, like in the Valley of Dry Bones. Yes, I mean, that they're going to breathe life, but the way that you kind of put a little bit of a pause, like, okay, maybe they're living in the first several verses and the land coming together, but then this breathing of life awaits a future time. Yeah. I thought that was very Brian the Venerable.
Yeah. And look, I mean, I've taught it over the years. I mean, I used to teach it kind of like we would sort of the standard Calvary Chapel understanding or interpretation of, the whole Gog and Magog, Russia, powers from the north coming down. This is a battle that is, maybe it's before the rapture, maybe it's just after the rapture. But over years and years of just looking at the text over and over again, I find for myself sometimes if I just keep looking at a text, you start to see stuff in the text, you're like, I didn't see that before, because sometimes what we do is we come with a preconceived idea about the text, and then that's how we understand it. And we're not looking at some of the nuance or some of the details. And then all of a sudden you start seeing these things. You're like, wait a second. How does that fit with my preconceived idea about this here? And then you have to realize maybe I got this wrong. So these aren't easy things, but
even like when I was a Calvinist, taking Ezekiel 37 in this valley of dry bones, again, with the muscles and the sinews and all this, that was like the go-to passage to show the sovereignty of God over salvation. And I'm like, well, the born-again experience really isn't even going, this is not quite what we're talking about here, but I'm glad that we leverage that to kind of reinforce our Calvinistic doctrine. But have you ever heard that?
I have not heard that one, but that's But that's one of the interesting things. I just listened to a friend do a series on Revelation, and he is he's all-mill. His position is all-millennial versus my position is premillennial. So, when it comes to the millennium, the 1,000-year reign of Christ, he sees that as figurative, not as a literal 1,000 years. He says we're in the millennium right now, and Satan is bound right now. And this is one of the best series I've ever heard on Revelation from the standpoint of tying it to today and challenging us to follow the Lord in this context and stuff. But when it came to those kinds of things, I disagreed, and I also ended up being reaffirmed in my own position. Like, these arguments are not really that strong. Because, when you start looking at these prophecies about Israel, you have to either say half the Bible, you just have to dismiss it as it was all symbolic and it's all somehow it doesn't really relate to what it says, like to Israel. It's really talking about the church, I guess. And then we just wipe out these incredible claims, promises, and so forth, that God's given to the nation, not just through the prophets, but through Jesus. I mean, Jesus says to Jerusalem, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. He's saying that to the nation. He's saying that to the people. So anyway, this is a little more complicated than sometimes it's made out to be.
Yes, it is. James, thanks for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. Got lots more great questions coming up, so stick around. We'll be back in a few minutes.
Pastor's Perspective continues in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. Pastor's Perspective continues. And now, here's today's host, Brian Perez.
Welcome back. Thank you so much for listening to Pastor's Perspective on the radio or on Facebook or on YouTube, or maybe you're listening a few days after this program airs on a podcast or online. Who knows? There's so many ways that you can listen to the program. Thank you for supporting us. Please share us with your friends as well. In the studio today, Brian Brodersen, the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California, and on the Bobby Cam, author and apologist, Dr. Bobby Conway from the 1 Minute Apologist channel on YouTube. Today's program is not live, so no need to call in today, but you can put the number in your phone if you want to so that you have it for future reference. It's 888-564-6173. We're going to start this segment with Luri in Rancho Cucamonga. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective, Luri.
Yeah, thank you for taking my call.
You bet.
I have a question for you guys.
We're ready.
Nowadays, I'm wondering what's going on with the Church of Jesus Christ.
Okay.
That drinking is okay, smoking is okay, Las Vegas is okay, abortion is okay, divorce is okay, and now no more marriages. Young people, they live together in churches.
So all these things, is this an example of good being called bad and bad being called good? Bobby, what would you say to Luri?
Well, Brian, yeah, I mean, I think that you are spot on. I mean, that is the time we're living in. I mean, it's almost like there's been a reversal of values. So it's like a new kind of guilt, so to speak, to accommodate this new moral code. So at one time, it was wrong in the culture, to get divorced, but now you're wrong to think it's wrong. At one time, it was wrong for abortion, but now you're wrong if you don't think it's right. At one time, it was wrong to engage in sex outside of marriage or homosexual sex, but now you're guilty if you don't celebrate that. And so on one side, it looks like moral relativism, but on the other side, when we're guided by the Word of God, we realize this isn't moral relativism. It's a culture that has changed, and the church is trying to accommodate the culture. And that is always dangerous. Thankfully, the church has a way of reforming itself, and the Holy Spirit has a way of capturing our attention. But this is not a new problem. So it's not like the morals are changing. What you see is people are constantly changing, and their values are constantly changing. And as the church, we're to be governed by scriptural principles, and we're to be governed by God's moral law from within and from what we see in the Word. But when we're more concerned about fitting into our culture, the culture is going to be moral. They're going to be relativistic in their choosing of morals. Now, that doesn't mean morals are relative. It just means that's the way they're going to operate. And so they're just going to kind of be switching things around. So we have to know how to not constantly accommodate and switch up on these things. And sadly, I mean, it's one thing. It would be overwhelming to have experienced the cultural moral revolution alone. And then to think so much of the church has went right along with it, that just compounds our problems. Like, in other words, if the church had stayed completely pure to what the Bible has to say, and the culture would have just fell hook, line, and sinker, we would have our work cut out for us in the arena of evangelism and what it looks like to live. But we extra have our work cut out for us because many professing Christians have went the way of the culture. And so this really makes our task difficult. I mean, what do you think about that, Pastor Brian? I mean, do you feel the tension of this?
Well, you know, just recently, very recently, the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, now, the archbishops historically, you've had good and bad archbishops. I mean, you've literally had archbishops who were like the enemies of the church. You know, they were persecuted Christians. They embraced false doctrine and so forth. But then, of course, you've had some that were good and solid and biblical. Now, Justin Welby comes into his position as the archbishop some years ago, not that many years ago, but I don't know, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10, I can't remember. But he comes in as an evangelical. And he's hailed as an evangelical, meaning he's a guy who's going to believe the Bible. He's going to put the Bible first. But a while back, he started waffling on the issue, the sexuality issue, and the issue of, homosexuality. So just a couple of days ago, he was asked point blank because, now let me give a little bit of background. So there's a Church of England school. I talked about this a week ago on Sunday. There's a Church of England college that has adopted a very pro-LGBT approach. So, they brought all of this into this Church of England college, and now we're going to be, affirming to all of the LGBT agenda and so forth. One guy, the chaplain at this school, he says, well, listen, I want to give the biblical alternative to this. And so he pretty much just lays out a biblical sexuality to the people. He gets fired from his job, and they even report him to the anti-terrorist task force because they say that he's a terrorist, basically. He's now, speaking out against the LGBT agenda, puts him in the category of terrorist. Now, thankfully, the police threw that out, and it didn't go any further with that. Yeah. But when the archbishop, both archbishops, there's a Canterbury archbishop and there's a York archbishop, both of them were asked by this guy and his representatives. Now, this guy's a Church of England clergyman. They were asked, would you support your guy? And they declined to do it. So now, a couple of days ago, Welby was being interviewed by, I don't know what paper it was, The Guardian or whatever. And basically they asked him, is same-sex sex, is it sin? And he was not able to give an answer to them as to whether same-sex sex was sin according to the Bible. So this is what you're talking about. This is the problem. The church has lost its way.
It has.
If the church, Jesus said it. If the blind lead the blind, they will both fall in a ditch. So if that church is trying to lead people out of the blindness of whatever their sin or problems is, they're not going to lead them anywhere but into another ditch somewhere.
Anything to close, Bobby?
Well, I mean, this is something, what's happening, guys, just in a moment of transparency, I wrote Doubting Toward Faith several years ago. I was in the throes of doubts. And what's happening today is there's something known as deconstructing. And so we're seeing a lot of people like the band member from DC Talk, ex-evangelical, and people are deconstructing. And so, obviously when you're deconstructing, you have to construct something. And I would say there were some things in my faith that were properly needed to be deconstructed. But hey, as long as I don't slip into heresy, if I've got like false teaching or if I've got legalism, I want to deconstruct the legalism out of my life to construct a faith that is true. But here we're living today where I went through that season of going through a lot of difficulty with doubts. And I can actually say it just feels good to me to be in a place because I feel like that season of doubt, of really thinking about what it is that I believe and why, man, I'm watching what's happening in our culture and people are just jumping ship and and I hate it. Because my heart, I'm getting more excited about the gospel right now, more excited about the hope for the church, more excited about being a Christian who believes in the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. And I think that we have a real opportunity right now. I don't know what Reformation is going to look like, but I would anticipate with all the stuff that's going down morally, because our church people have chased after the culture so much, we're going to need some leaders to say, now hold on. Let's come together. What is our manifesto? Even in the time of Hitler's Germany, you had Dietrich Bonhoeffer and you had Karl Barth. You had these people who are known as the confessors because so many people were falling in line with the state church, so to speak. And so you could go into a church and you could have a cross and a swastika in the church. You could hail Hitler and hail Jesus. Yeah. But for those that didn't want to hail Hitler, you just want to hail Jesus, these would become the confessors. And there was like this underground reform going on. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what that's going to look like. Brian, with your platform and with the radio and your connections, maybe God could use you to pull together certain voices and people. But I almost feel like we need to get a handle on what it is, where the church is at. Because I'm not really sure what parts of the church have compromised and went off the deep end on this thing. And where is the true church? And how then are we going to begin to really disciple our flocks? Because there was a time when the culture shared the values of the church. I don't think pastors felt like they needed to disciple their people on these moral issues because, culture at large believed on these moral things. But man, we have got to get back to discipleship.
Absolutely. Yep, and like you said a minute ago, I'm more. I don't know. I've never lost my fervor or passion to teach the word, to preach the word. Never lost it, but I feel like I'm gaining an intensity. Yes. I just see. To me, it's just like a crystal clear thing. It's like, God's word or bust. There's nothing else out there. There's nobody has any solution. It's mankind has just exhausted. We've exhausted ourselves in trying to live without God. And, I truly think apart from an intervention of the Lord, it's going to go way, way south. That's where it's headed, And so I'm going to send you a really fascinating interview I listened to today. I was thinking about you when I was listening to it with N.T. Wright and Douglas Murray. And boy, it is fascinating. Douglas Murray is he was identifying as a Christian atheist. It's interesting. He's recently kind of modified it to agnostic. Very brilliant guy, public intellectual, and he's calling out the church. He's saying, look, the problem is we need the people in the world. We need you to be who you're supposed to be. We need you to be who the Bible says that you're supposed to be. And so this guy's a, he's an agnostic at this point, but he's calling the church out to say, look, unless you guys do this, we're sunk. He is basically saying that the world is sunk unless the church begins to live out what Jesus taught.
One last thing that I would say is, on a point of good news, I was encouraged to see that France and their public education, I read something that they are going to refuse to go the way of this gender-inclusive language because it butchers the French language and it's too confusing for their kids to keep up with all this. And I thought, wow, if France is getting exhausted on some of this stuff, maybe there's some good news for us ahead.
So you're talking about like the whole they, them, and all that?
Yes.
The Demi Lovato, they are now non-binary.
Mm-hmm. Non-binary.
Yeah, and they want us to know that. So after much reflection, yes,
they're cisgender.
Luri, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. Next, we're going to go to Mary. You're on with Brian Brodersen and Bobby Conway. Thank you for calling.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I was calling because my kids were all raised Christians, and they have all given their lives to the Lord, but unfortunately their dad left our family, and they've had some bad experiences, and my son that I'm referring to right now is pretty cynical when it comes to Christianity, and hasn't gone to church since Christmas Eve of 2019, and he's 23. But anyway, I asked him if he would go to church with me on Mother's Day, and he said sure. Well, he works late and he stays up late, so Mother's Day came and he couldn't wake up. So then he said, well, you can bug me every Sunday till I go. And I've heard things about, asking people to go to church, and they keep saying no, that their heart can become more hard towards it. And I don't know. I didn't know if he was saying that just to pacify me, just to kind of like, okay, well, I'll just tell her I'm tired every week. If it's better, I just want your perspective. Would it be better if I just said, you tell me when you're ready?
Right. Bobby, what would you tell Mary?
Well, I mean, this is tough because the relationship that you have with your son. I think, yes. I mean, obviously, if we're just pestering and, mandating it, that's a different thing. That's not what I'm hearing from your heart. Wise choice. I'm pulling out the Mother's Day card, by the way. Very fitting. And I'm sorry that did not materialize. But if he's genuinely just saying, hey, Mom, just keep asking me, and you don't think he cares, then keep asking. Like if that is kind of his personality type, like, yeah, Mom, don't feel bad about it. But if keep asking and you do that and you feel like you're nagging and getting him frustrated, then just use your mother discerner and back off. And I would say that first off, I'm so sorry to hear about your husband leaving your family. That is got to be a very disillusioning thing for anybody that goes through that. And so it's tough. Yeah, we have to be careful because sometimes we so want our kids, don't we? Like to be in a certain spot, to be in a certain place. And at the end of the day, we have to just remember, ultimately, they're God's kids. And we need to ask the Lord to help them. And, the good news is he's still really, really young. And you just keep living for Jesus. And Lord willing, down the road, he'll get a hold of his heart. And I say Lord willing. Well, it's obviously the Lord's will that he goes to church. But your son willing will hopefully follow the Lord's will down the road.
You mentioned a key word there, Bobby, nagging. And if Mary keeps doing it out of love, and if there's not that perception from her son that she's just nagging him to go to church, because that's the time when people harden their hearts. If you keep asking people, hey, would you go to church with me? You evil, rotten sinner, you need to go to church. That's probably the kind of language that will harden people's hearts more than just doing it out of love, right?
Yeah, I think so. And one of the things I think that we do need to think about, like I read yesterday, I think 16% of our millennials now would believe in God. And the percentage of Gen Xers has even dropped significantly. These are numbers that would have been closer to 50% at one time. So you can see how much we're becoming secularized, or people are identifying as nuns, that is, they don't have any affiliation. And so one of the things that I do think that we have to ask ourselves as pastors and as church leaders is what's going on in the church? Because I think sometimes we might overpromise, like, oh, go to church. It's going to be unbelievable. You're going to meet some amazing community. You're going to hear an incredible message. You'll start praying to God. It's going to be so sweet. And you go to church and, you were bored to tears. You get in a small group and you are gossiped about, and you pray and it feels like your prayers are hitting a ceiling. And I think one of the things that we might have done is we overpromise and underdeliver. Like, we need to set what Jesus was amazing about is setting our expectations right. Like, take up your cross. Hey, they blasted me. They're going to blast you. You might die. And I think that what we've done is we have basically not held out that kind of a message because we haven't wanted to lose our people, and we've tried to keep people on entertainment. And I think that we've got to get back to true biblical discipleship, and we need to let people know that, man, prayer's confusing sometimes. And yes, it's so awesome when God answers your prayers, but a lot of times you're going to feel like you show up in your quiet time and God hasn't shown up to meet you. Sometimes you're going to get in a small group and it's going to be a miserable experience, because what happens is so many people think that going to small groups is going to be this unbelievable experience. They go get in them and it was horrible. And so they quit going to church and they felt like the pastors misled them. And so I think in so many ways we have got, maybe a good question for pastors and their staff is this: where have we misled the people in the church in the areas of worship, small groups, community, prayer? And what do we need to do to speak more honestly about what it means to pick up a cross? Because here's the deal. If you tell people that you might die, you might be persecuted, you might be hated, well, I mean, you talk about setting the bar really low, people might stick around on that kind of gospel.
Plus, people might be out for an adventure. What? I might die? Okay, yeah. I'm in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I remember hearing something recently too. I don't think it's the same article, but millennials and people that aren't going to church nowadays, it's not that they're sick of church, but they want to know about Jesus. So that's the thing that's setting them apart.
Yeah, and sometimes they want to know about the Jesus that fits their worldview or their lifestyle.
Yeah.
Right.
When you tell them about the real Jesus, they're like, "Oh, I don't like him." So
yes,
yeah.
Right.
I mean, we have to be careful, but the churches, obviously, we can all take some inventory. We can all probably do a better job at trying to see how the Lord would have us to accommodate and be sensitive and all of that. But at the end of the day, like Bobby's saying, the gospel calls people to die.
Mm-hmm.
Take up your cross and follow me. That was not like, hey man, let's go on a cool trip.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, this is going to be challenging. And I think too, sometimes, we come with these like if you're going to church, like you think you're going to some event where you're just going to get all these feelings and things, that's really the wrong take to even begin with. You need to go to church to seek God and to Lord, I'm here. I'm here to be convicted. I'm here to be challenged. I'm here to be encouraged. I'm here to be strengthened. I'm here to be a blessing to other people. I'm here to learn how to die to myself and take up the cross and follow you.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that if we could tell people on the front end that you might join a small group and the experience could be incredibly miserable. But there's a familial responsibility that we have to one another as Christians. But don't underestimate when that pain comes your way that there's things that we could even learn. When somebody gossips about us and we start worrying about what other people think, God might use that as an opportunity for us to remember that our identity is in Him and that we're ultimately worried about what He thinks. And so we can help people to understand that we're not trying to offer a vision of this perfect church. In fact, you're joining a church that's incredibly dysfunctional because it's made up of people. And we're going to do our best to help the vision be clear, but we're going to butcher this. And we're going to think we're hearing from God at times, and we're not. And we're going to have people that are going to hurt people. And we're going to have moral failures in our church. But through it all, we're going to try to be faithful and grow and ask what we can learn from it. I just wonder if we got to really start rethinking when we're inviting people to be a part of a church, what are we inviting them to be a part of? Like, what are we telling them? Like, what are we really telling them? Because if we're telling them something that's misguided and wrong, then they might get disillusioned with church and go away. And ultimately, we might find out, wow, some of this was on us.
Yeah. And I think that, we need, in the end, we're inviting people to Jesus, right? I mean, that's really the thing. The church is, the church can be an avenue to get to Jesus. And of course, the church, once we come to Jesus, is the place to grow in our faith. But I think sometimes we just need to get back to the reality that, the church is not Jesus, and the church is not going to do for you what Jesus will do for you. So I think maybe sometimes that's, there's been so much emphasis on what kind of church and what style of church and all of that stuff. It's funny. I mean, sometimes I remember I wrote a paper a while back it was on the subject of the nuns, that you were talking about, Bobby, people that no longer identify as religious. And then, of course, the book that I was reviewing was saying, this is what you've got to do and this is what they're going to look for. And then it was like, I just wrote, hey, I went to the coolest church on the planet at the time. Mm-hmm. I did not go there for that reason. I didn't even think about it being cool. I went there because I met Jesus and I knew I needed to go to church. It was that simple.
That's right.
All right. That is all the time we have on today's program. Thank you all for listening. Thank you for calling. Sorry that we couldn't get to all of your calls, but we'll be back tomorrow. So call us then, 888-564-6173. For Brian Brodersen and Bobby Conway, I'm Brian Perez. Good night.
Thanks for listening to Pastor's Perspective. We trust you've been blessed and had your question answered. Join us Monday through Friday and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/pastorsperspective. The preceding was sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa, California.